But this guy wins a lot of trades. He wins almost all of them. And I think most of us all have to admit that there's something about him and everything he's accomplished where he goes into negotiation thinking, yeah, well, I could also not do this, and it's not going to be as big of a deal because it's me, especially now in the state that he's working. I spent a lot of time on Sunday with Simmons on our Sunday pods talking about Minnesota's deal for Rudy Gobert. And as I said, even though I don't like it, because I think you have to be a Gobert guy to like it. And I've become less and less of a Gobert guy. We talked about it, I think, for almost 30 plus minutes. So I don't need to recap all of that stuff. But there was still one part of this that I did want to revisit that I didn't touch on there, and I think is important when you're trying to understand what it's like to do a deal with Danny Ainge. I do think it's funny that Ainge is now kind of considered good again. And after this deal happens, they get all these picks. And it wasn't really about the players. It was all the unprotected picks that they would get for a Gobert, who is a really expensive player who's not, he may be all NBA, but that's more positionally than it is at any point. Have any of your friends, have you ever sat around going, hey, who are the 15 best players in the NBA? Do you guys say Rudy Gobert? I guess if there's one guy that's completely married to the analytics, he would say that. But it was kind of this victory lap for Ainge. And I thought, wait, this is weird. I thought everybody thought this guy sucked. I know I've gotten into arguments with people that are on the air about Ainge. I don't think he was likable as a player. So for an older generation, maybe that carried over as him as an executive. There were lean years. I think any of you that have listened to me for a really long time, even though I am someone that is kind of called a Boston guy, I'm probably, I'd like to say the most fair. Others would say I might be one of the most anti-Boston guys. I'm not from Boston. I lived there. I spent a lot of time there, but I'm always a little cautious on trying to represent myself as some guy from Roxbury. Like that's just not who I am. But I mean, hell, this Celtics team I couldn't stand watching in January, and I still wasn't sure this entire time. So I think that track record there is very clear. But when I think somebody's being talked about unfairly, or I just think everybody's off, I'm going to say it. And I always thought people were off on Ainge. You can go through the draft picks that aren't very good. Langford doesn't look like it's going to be much. Who knows what ends up happening with Neesmith as he got traded in the Brogdon deal. They did the Desmond Bane deal where he ended up in Memphis when he could have been with the Celtics. The Fab Melo pick. And I remember reading one piece that was like Ainge is terrible at drafting, and the guy that did the piece, this is actually something that was online available for consumption. He wasn't smart enough to realize that when you go to Basketball Reference and you look up a team's draft picks historically, they don't change them based on who you traded out. So he started writing this piece and he started blaming them for like multiple guys that they didn't even draft. Like they technically had the pick, but it ended up being somewhere else. What I've always argued about with Ainge is that, okay, fine. He had some real lean years with the mid to later round picks. By the way, if you do it long enough, you're probably going to have a bad stretch, but he's really good at the important stuff. He wins the trades, and he's still somebody that found a way to do the Tatum deal when I don't think most people would have done that. And he picked Jaylen Brown, which I definitely couldn't believe at the time because I don't know. I didn't really get it. With Jaylen Brown, I was wrong about Jaylen Brown. He also, before he bounced, Peyton Pritchard, Rob Williams. Pritchard was 26th. Williams was 27th. Grant was 22nd. That's 3 rotation players in the 20s, 3 finals rotation players. So it felt like he was kind of riding the ship there a little bit at the end. But on his way out, it felt stale. It all felt stale. I don't think the Celtics are ever going to fire him. And he ends up being able to keep his son in place. The front office has stabilization. Brad Stevens moves up to the front office. They do the coach. And then he waits it out. Everybody knew he was always going to end up running this Utah team because Ryan Smith, who buys the Jazz, is like his close friend. And everybody had been talking about this for a couple of years. All right, so he pulls off this trade. I want to talk about personalities because I think this can apply to a lot of us and a lot of stuff that we do. Like, who is Ainge, right? Who is Ainge? What does he see when he looks in the mirror? Well, he sees a guy that, for 40 years was either a player in the NBA, a coach, a broadcaster, an executive now for almost 20. The guy also played baseball. So he probably likes what he sees when he thinks about his approach as a basketball person, a person whose life has been in athletics. When he looks in the mirror, he's probably thinking like, I know what I'm doing. I'll tell you right now, and talking to guys for as many years as I have, there are very few that will ever say, I'm kind of not good at this. No one, I've never heard anyone ever say that. Hey, what happened with this draft pick? Oh, well, it was this, and this. But like, were you wrong about him? Like, nah, there's a bunch of other things going on. All right. So when Ainge is talking to somebody else about basketball, there's a pretty good chance that Ainge thinks he's right. And if you have that kind of personal resume, and look, he's not one of the all-time greats. I'm not saying that. He's not some like Hall of Fame player. But when you've accomplished in basketball, in the game of basketball, what he has accomplished, there's a pretty good chance there's some entitlement there that, at least in this case, is more deserved than some of the other entitlement that we have. This guy wins a title with the 86 Celtics. He's almost a god in Utah, which is saying something. All right, so now he's back running the Jazz. There's another comp that I want to come up with here, and that's Steve Nash. Steve Nash, they're burning the ships on our guy Steve Nash right now. His roster's at mutiny level. It's been a mess. Steve Nash is a Hall of Famer who's banked about $150 million. He's going to be all right. And I would guarantee if you got Nash in a spot where it was like, how is he processing through all of this stuff? Is he completely stressed out, filled with anxiety? Or is he like, hey, you know what? Like, I've accomplished some really big things. This is a challenge. We'll see what the next one is. Whereas if you were Kenny Atkinson, if you were still the Nets coach, there's a good chance Kenny Atkinson's probably handling this differently because he does not have the resume of the guys that we were just talking about. When I ask teams about interviewing coaches, there's a common theme that'll happen. And I'll use two examples that I was not used as example stories-wise. But like if you're a Chauncey Billups or if you're a Jason Kidd and you go into interview for a job, you're interviewing as Jason Kidd or Chauncey Billups, right? And if you're, say, Mosley down in Orlando, a lifelong assistant, all these assistants that we've seen get gigs recently, Ime Udoka as well, you're going to handle that interview probably a little bit differently because you know that when you're sitting down across the desk from the decision makers, that they're viewing you as that lifelong assistant, which is much different than looking at a Jason Kidd, or in this case, we're talking about somebody like Danny Ainge. Now, the other front office people are probably desensitized to it because they've been around it their whole lives. So it's not like, Ainge played and Tim Conley, Matt Lloyd didn't play. So that means that he's going to get over on him. That's not exactly what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying. But I think it also, if you look at like how we react, like if you meet somebody who's either a pro athlete or a public figure or somebody that's in the spotlight. Hell, I remember when one of Jim Carrey's movies was being filmed in Burlington, Vermont, back when I was still bartending, and Renee Zellweger came by and she asked for a glass, I think, of white Zin. And the owner's like, just tell her it's for free. And we like handed it to her and did like this thank you thing. And I'm like, Renee Zellweger's just getting free drinks all night because of what? Jerry Maguire? Like, all right, that's fine. Again, it wasn't my booze. Like, I don't give a shit. But this is a very common thing that you carry yourself a certain way. You carry yourself a way that kind of reflects what you've accomplished. And again, there's plenty of people that have accomplished nothing that carry themselves in big, grand ways, which is actually kind of impressive if you think about it. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that Ainge, when he's on the phone with someone, he doesn't really give a shit because he doesn't really have to. And so he's going to ask for his price. You're going to get mad and he's going to hang up the phone. And he's not going to sit by the phone. He's not going to call you back. He's not going to double check. He's not going to tweak the offer. He's going to see how desperate you are because he has the patience of someone that not only has the resume that we've covered, he also has the personality of somebody that is so revered in Utah. He doesn't have to do anything that he doesn't want to. Why do I know this? Because I asked somebody years ago about the Nets trade. I'm like, how the hell did he do that? Like, how did he do that? And the way it was told to me was that the Nets made an offer for Garnett, Pierce, and all the pieces. Remember, they wanted to move off of Wallace's contract. They wanted to throw in some draft picks. And Ainge was like, oh, all right. Ainge shared that offer with everybody else, with the Celtics. People were like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, those guys are kind of washed. Do it. And Ainge was like, I don't think I want to do it now. Let's see what happens. He waited. He waited when everybody else probably wouldn't have. He waited because of who he's been. He waited and he ended up getting an absurd price because he got all of the swaps on top of the unprotected picks. I don't know how many other people would have done that. And maybe you have to have that kind of resume. Not that Daryl Morey isn't difficult and doesn't ask for everything if non-players. It's not like all the non-players. But there's something in it. There's this comfort that you have when you have accomplished really impressive things. It's the reason why Magic will always have a gig. All right? Pat Riley isn't necessarily on every single trade call, but Pat Riley has a presence about him where he is being kind of almost consumed differently from the person across the desk than just a guy who's a grinder, started video and worked his way up for 20 years. This isn't to say that Ainge is better than everybody else. You know, that's not what it is. He was always better than he was being talked about. He wasn't getting enough credit on the way out of Boston, but that's just the way it works. The thing isn't working out. Hey, I thought this team was supposed to be better. All right, you're to blame. You've had some bad drafts, on and on and on. He was never that bad. But this guy wins a lot of trades. He wins almost all of them. And I think most of us all have to admit that there's something about him and everything he's accomplished where he goes into negotiation thinking, yeah, well, I could also not do this, and it's not going to be as big of a deal because it's me, especially now in the state that he's working. One little bonus piece here. I've seen this a lot with Nash as well, who we mentioned earlier. And Bill even brought up some of it too with Sean Marks as well. It's like, hey, there's some in the gap stuff. They could have done this deal. Maybe they shouldn't have done that one, all this stuff. Not disagreeing with any of it. All right. Nash could have been our coach. Okay, fine. But you know what? We wouldn't be here if the players just fucking play. You see that roster? You see what it looks like on paper? I'm not sure TJ Warren's even healthy right now. But when you look at that roster and you go, you know what would have solved a lot of problems? If everybody played. So I don't really want to hear about the Sean Marks stuff, and I don't want to hear about the Nash stuff.